Thank you for tuning in to the Voice of the Victim podcast. We discuss a lot of sad and potentially triggering things on this show. We try to be as sensitive and cautious as possible, but if you are sensitive to things involving abuse and may be triggered, please think twice before listening to our show.
Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
How are you doing, Rosie?
I'm good. We just got back from paddleboarding / kayaking in the river.
Yeah.
It was lovely. Did you enjoy it, Ryan?
I did, a lot more than I'm used to. I've started kind of another new chapter health-wise because, as you know, I started eating keto on Friday again. Mm-hmm. And it's really made me more positive.
Yeah.
Like, it's weird. But I did really enjoy going out on the river with you.
Good. I'm glad.
You also got some news for your sloth bear, I hear.
Oh, well, I did tell everybody that I adopted my sloth bear.
Did you?
I think so.
You seem unsure.
I don't remember. The whole point is the dancing bears, and so...
Oh, yeah. Aren't we doing a Patreon episode about that at some point?
Yeah, eventually. But anyways, I got very passionate about these bears and adopted one, because that's what happens when I research for Patreon. Anyways, I got an update that my bear named Bean is doing quite well and has been enjoying, what does it say?
Burrito. No. Speaking of beans.
Yeah, really. Bean the bear has been enjoying some special treats from a hard plastic ball that he enjoys to play with.
Aw, cute. Was that the full update?
Yeah, not too much is new for Bean.
Nice. Well, we want to thank our new patrons, Chelsea and Maria.
Yay!
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
So, are you ready to jump into it?
Yeah, do you want me to read the 5-star first?
Oh, yeah, I almost forgot. We got to share a 5-star review.
Okay, this one is called Simple and Raw. It says, love the simplicity of how you cover stories. Love your hearts for the victims. It's from My Life, My Terms, via Apple Podcasts, USA. Simple and Raw. I liked her Simple and Raw review.
Oh, nice. Bring it back around.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
My Life, My Terms.
My Life, My Terms. Is that your real name?
Gosh, you're so funny today.
I'm sorry. This episode of Voice of the Victim podcast is sponsored by Podcorn. You guys know Rosie and I are very passionate about the things we talk about on the show, but it does take a lot of time and energy.
Sponsors help us be able to work less at our other jobs and spend more time making this show the best it can be.
But you guys know we're not the most experienced kids, so we had no idea where to find sponsors.
Right.
But thankfully, the awesome people over at Podcorn have helped even us be able to find sponsors for our show.
So true. Podcorn is a simple and easy to use marketplace that connects podcasters directly to the amazing sponsorship opportunities. And there's no middleman, so podcasters can choose what their specific rate is and collaborate directly with the brands.
Yeah, personally, I don't like it when there's just a random ad that isn't read by the podcasters themselves. I prefer it to be host-read ads, and I love having that option.
You don't need to give up creative control or rights to your podcast to use Podcorn, and the people that work there are always willing to work with you and make the process painless.
And they secure funds before we even start working on the ad and make sure that we're paid when we're done. So they take care of all of the complicated stuff.
The marketplace mission of Podcorn is to give podcasters transparency, creative freedom, and full control of how and when they monetize their hard work.
And we know podcasters work hard. So if you're a podcaster of any size, click the link in our show notes to sign up to Podcorn and start browsing opportunities to find your own sponsors. Well, tonight's story takes place in South Dakota, in the town of Vermilion, which is in the very southeastern corner of South Dakota. It's right near the border of Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. So it's not super far from us. So who are we talking about tonight, Rosie?
We're sharing the story of Pamela Jackson and Cheryl Miller. It was May 29th, 1971. Cheryl and Pamela were both 17-year-old girls. Cheryl Miller was known as Sherry by her friends.
So that's what we're going to call her.
Sherry was born on November 16th, 1953 in Vermillion, South Dakota, to her parents Melvin and Helen Miller. Sherry was a very caring person and made friends easily because of her outgoing personality. In high school, she performed on the cheerleading squad, skillfully twirling the baton. She was very close to her brother Alan, who had been her role model. She also had two sisters named Rita and Dawn.
Yeah, it seems like neither Melvin or Helen, the parents, were as much a part of Sherry's life by the time she was 17, which is where our story takes place. They had split up by then, and Helen had married a man named Leonard By. But this situation probably made Sherry and Alan's relationship stronger, being siblings in a broken family.
Right. Sherry had moved in with her grandparents, Nick and Pearl Jensen, when her mother Helen had left her and moved in with Leonard.
So Sherry seemed to have handled this situation well because, like we mentioned, she was known as a very level-headed and smart, caring person, and it showed in the way she cared for her grandparents when she lived with them.
Sherry's grandmother was terminally ill with cancer and needed to be cared for. Because her grandma was so sick, a lot of the household responsibilities fell on Sherry, including many of the chores and the cooking. Sherry had dreams of moving to California with her cousin and getting into the fashion designer industry.
Which didn't seem too far-fetched because she did have a talent for sewing.
Sherry also had an after-school job working at the Dakota Hospital, which happens to be the place where she became close friends with her friend Pamela Jackson, who was better known as Pam.
So Sherry really had a lot of responsibility as a 17-year-old.
Yeah, a lot. Pam had a more stable home life. She was the daughter of Oscar and Adele Jackson. They were a farming family, as her father Oscar had been raised on a farm near Vermillion, and they were also very hospitable people, always willing to give their time to others and make coffee and cookies for their friends. Pam Jackson also had an interest in the clothing industry and was a skilled seamstress. Like her parents, she often went out of her way to do kind things for her friends, like planning slumber parties or baking for them. Pam and Sherry were both very well liked in school and in their community.
So that's about all the background available about these girls because it was 1971, almost 50 years ago now. But I do just want to say, when I look at pictures of Pam Jackson and her father Oscar, I can't help but see Link Neal from Rhett and Link.
So funny.
It is. They both look like him to me, and I wonder if they're related somehow. But anyway, now we're going to talk about what happened May 29th, 1971.
Right. Sherry was invited to a party at a local gravel quarry with some friends from school that night. Since she lived with and cared for her grandparents, Sherry was able to use their car. It was a beige 1960 Studebaker Lark.
Studebaker. Now, Sherry seems like she was the more popular one. She's the one that got invited, but she didn't want to go by herself, so she invited her friend Pam to go along with her to the party, as well as Sherry's cousin, a different Pam, Pam Stewart. But the cousin wasn't able to make it because she had to babysit last minute.
At this time, Sherry's grandma wasn't doing very well, and Sherry's grandma was actually staying at the hospital where the girls both worked. Before heading to the quarry, they stopped to visit Sherry's grandma. They stayed at the hospital until about 9:30 p.m. After this, they met up with some friends from school in the parking lot of a local church.
Do high schoolers still meet up in church parking lots before going to a party?
I never knew they really did.
This part really stood out to me because I was like, that doesn't happen anymore. Maybe some communities do. But anyway.
After meeting up with the friends, Sherry and Pam followed another car full of boys, who planned to lead them to the quarry. On the way to the quarry, the boys said they accidentally either missed a turn or made a wrong turn and lost the girls. When they got back on track, there was no sign of the Studebaker with the girls. but they continued on their way to the quarry, hoping they'd found their way there. But the girls never showed up to the party.
But this didn't really cause much alarm for the classmates here because these two girls were relatively tame compared to some of their classmates, like the ones that were going to the quarry.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't really go to these parties very often, so they just figured the girls decided to do something else or, like, decide to go home because it was already after 9:30 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
It was late and dark. Might have been tired, so they just kind of shrugged it off.
Right. Pam's mom, Adele, would leave the kitchen light on when Pam was going to be out late so she could see when she got home. And typically, Pam would turn it off once she was safe inside. But around 4 a.m. the next morning, Pam's mother, Adele, had gotten up and noticed that the kitchen light was still on. Adele went to Pam's bedroom and realized that she wasn't there.
Dude, I'd be so panicked if I were her in this situation, finding out, like, uh-oh, this isn't normal. But she handled it much more calmly than I would have. She figured they may have had car troubles or stayed in town with a friend.
Yeah, both of those are, like, clearly good guesses.
Mm-hmm.
Adele and Oscar waited until a decent time and then started calling around to different homes of Pam's friends. But call after call, they kept getting the same answer. She wasn't at any of their homes. Now beginning to really worry, they called the police to report their daughter missing.
And being 1971, freshly out of the free-spirited 60s, many people, they had that free spirit attitude. So around this time, there were a lot of runaway kids.
Oh, yeah, I guess, there was a lot of runaways and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The free love movement.
Like that 70s show.
That's all I'm basing my knowledge from the 70s from.
Same.
And this is exactly what the police assumed when they first received the call.
But they were soon informed of some of the other details that didn't really add up with this runaway theory.
Neither of the girls had packed anything for being away from home. They had also both gotten paid that day, but hadn't collected their paychecks yet.
Which didn't really go along with the runaway theory because you'd think if you were a teen running away from home, you'd take as much money as you could get. But then again, if they had been planning it out, maybe leaving behind their paychecks was part of their plan to make it look like they were kidnapped when they really just ran away.
Yeah, but why would they want their family and friends to think that they were kidnapped? Like, that's so sad.
I know.
But
it's
it is
true.
a theory.
The police would look harder if they thought it was a kidnapping than they would if it was a runaway.
Right. And another odd thing is that Sherry was her grandmother's primary caretaker. Why would she just leave her there?
Mm-hmm. Again, maybe the stress of caring for her grandparents became too much for Sherry. These are just ideas that could have been floating around.
That's true. She had a lot of responsibilities for a 17-year-old.
Yeah, it could really get to you. Maybe visiting her that night was really just her way of saying goodbye. Again, it's just speculation that could have happened. Before we get too distracted with that, there were some searches done.
The gravel pit where the girls were heading was searched, but there was no sign of them. They also searched the roads in the surrounding areas, as well as the Missouri River.
But rivers are constantly flowing and changing, and it can be so easy to miss something in a huge body of water where the bottom's obscured. And again, this is the early 70s, so there's no thermal imaging or ground-penetrating radar. These searches were a lot harder than they are today.
Mm-hmm. People asked for divers to be sent into the Missouri River to search, or even that the river be drained. But ultimately, it was decided that the current was too strong and it would be too dangerous to attempt that search. Sadly, they found no trace of the girls, and the case went cold. Once the police records were released to the public, it was found that police did believe that the girls had simply run away. Sherry's grandmother, Pearl, she passed away because of her cancer just 6 days after the girls went missing.
Yeah, so basically, police gave up and ruled it as a runaway, even though it didn't really add up. But Pam's father, Oscar, wasn't going to give up as easily as law enforcement did, and he spent many days and nights walking up and down roads nearby, searching nearby fields and forests and around the river. He even visited the police station a lot to look through photos of unidentified deceased women to see if he could recognize one as his daughter.
That's really sad.
I know, it's sad, and that would be really hard to do. Like, what if you did come across it?
Do you think he wanted to find his daughter, or was he relieved every day when he couldn't find her in the pictures?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, it would be nice to get closure, but at the same time, you don't want to see your daughter in that pile of photos. So, like you said, it's so sad to see a father trying so hard to just get some closure and getting nowhere.
Oscar also checked his daughter's social security number frequently to see if anyone had been using it. But sadly, he never found anything relating to his daughter or her friend. It was like they literally just vanished into thin air.
Can you even imagine the disappointment? Just no idea, no trace, no clues.
It really seemed like the families would never get answers about what happened to their loved ones. Over 3 decades passed with absolutely no leads.
But now we need to introduce a couple new characters. A woman known only as DH, who we'll refer to as Dottie, and a man named David Lykken.
In 1989, Dottie had been married to a man for 16 years, and they had 2 children together. But in May of 1989, she decided to separate from him. Dottie felt it was the best decision for her and her children, but it wasn't easy for her. She was struggling to get used to caring for her family alone after being married for 16 years, and was attending counseling for help to deal with the new circumstances. She began taking computer classes at the University of South Dakota while also working part-time as a secretary at her church in early 1990. Despite the distraction, she was still heartbroken over the situation and felt vulnerable. This is when she met David Lykken in her computer class. He seemed to be very attentive, kind, and comforting to her at a time where she needed it.
So before long, the two of them began dating, and things seemed fine and normal at first. But after a while, David was starting to become a bit possessive, and he got himself involved in the divorce proceedings with Dottie and her ex-husband. So here's where it gets really bizarre. On June 11th, 1990, Dottie received her divorce papers, which you would expect her to be emotional, but for some reason, her new boyfriend, David Lykken, was more upset than she was.
Okay.
Which doesn't make sense to me because you'd think he'd be excited that she's getting divorced.
Right. He apparently called her extremely upset and talked about killing himself because he was so upset. He even talked about his property and how it should be divided when he died. Weird.
I know. I have a really hard time understanding his reasoning here because, like I said, you'd think the new boyfriend would be thrilled about his girlfriend getting divorced. But
right.
Obviously, his erratic behavior here left a bad taste in Dottie's mouth.
After this bizarre behavior, she decided to break up with David. She told him she still wanted to be friends, but couldn't be romantically involved with him anymore.
And this makes sense. She just got out of a 16-year marriage that didn't go well. She's not about to get into another one with a man that's showing such a huge red flag right away. So she broke up with him, or at least she tried.
But apparently David decided to pretend it never happened. He continued to regularly phone her and stop by her apartment without warning.
The pop-in, if you will.
Yuck. She'd reiterate that they were no longer dating, and he'd say he understood, but his actions showed otherwise. On June 15th, Dottie wrote him a letter blatantly telling him that she just wanted to be friends, but he ignored it and instead met up with her and wept.
He's a soft boy, apparently.
One time, when he popped in uninvited, she actually drew an imaginary line at the door and told him not to cross it. And when he continued to push, the typically kind and gentle Dottie became irritated and unfriendly towards him. Well, good. Like, stand your ground.
Yeah, of course. This guy was being a total creep. And for the rest of June and even into July of 1990, David continued showing up at her house late at night or early in the morning, uninvited. So at this point, he's stalking and harassing her.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I want to make this clear. She had an apartment in Vermilion, but she also had a home with a large yard outside of town, a more rural area. And she had taken her children to stay at the rural home. I wonder if that was their family home and then her apartment was where she moved after she split from her husband.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, David showed up there and offered to mow the lawn, which she tried to refuse, but he persisted until she let him.
It's hard to say no to that offer.
I guess. Dottie had gone to a friend's home that evening, and David showed up at the friend's house to let her know that he'd finished mowing.
Like, okay, thanks. I would have seen that when I got home, but...
Then, on July 4th of 1990, she had taken her kids out to the rural home and invited a group of friends over to watch the fireworks from their yard. And again, David showed up uninvited. Because he was there, Dottie's friends got really uncomfortable and left early.
Yeah, I mean, his behavior was so erratic that it was very obvious from the outside. One of the friends at this party was also there for the mowing incident. I'm guessing it's the friend whose house Dottie was at when David came to announce he was done mowing. But in the court documents, this friend is just referred to as J.I. So we'll just call them Jerry. Jerry will come into play later.
On July 9th, Dottie received her official divorce decree, which took an emotional toll on her. And so when David called her that evening, she told him flat out that she didn't feel up to dealing with him at that time. But he ignored that and told her he was really depressed and desperately needed someone to talk to.
Well, she remained silent because he often used this as a way to manipulate her feelings and get her to talk. But this evening, she wasn't going to bite. After an uncomfortable length of silence, David shouted at her, "Well, excuse me," and hung up. So this guy obviously needed some professional help and very well may have been extremely depressed, but that doesn't give him the right to harass his ex-girlfriend and her family.
Mm-hmm.
That's just so disturbing.
Well, later that night, around midnight, he called again and asked Dottie to pray with him, saying he had a message from God for her.
Which always goes well.
She listened to him ramble up until he hung up and fell asleep, as he had woken her up in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So remember Jerry, her friend, early in the morning of July 10th, after getting off the phone with Dottie, David called Jerry. So this was after that phone call thing. I guess he woke up and he was agitated about Dottie's child custody order. And of course, he began crying on the phone. And the call frightened Jerry, but this gives a bit more insight into why David was upset about the divorce decree. Something to do with the custody of the children. I don't know what it was, but there's really only two things. Either he wanted them or he didn't want them,
right.
Which either way is weird. I don't know.
At about 1:15 a.m. on July 10th, 1990, Dottie awoke from a dead sleep to find someone sitting at the edge of her bed. It was too dark for her to see, but then she heard a voice say, "Dottie, why can't you love me?" She realized it was David and told him to leave. He stood up and Dottie hoped he was leaving, but instead, he turned on the light and told her he wanted to make love to her one more time before he died. Terrifying. Can you imagine waking up and there's somebody at the edge of the bed asking, "Why can't you love them?" That's insane. That's like horror movie in the making.
So we want to warn you, this next part is very violent and disturbing. So if you want to skip ahead, this is the time. We're about to describe what happened according to the court documents based on the affidavit of Dottie. But we will be as non-graphic as possible while still trying to get across what Dottie had to go through here.
He started trying to get physical with her, and Dottie pushed him away. But he slammed her down on the bed, and this happened twice.
So Dottie was in a lot of shock. He had never been violent with her physically before.
David started trying to take off her underwear, and she fought back. putting her legs together, crossing her ankles, but he pinned her and took them off. After that, he demanded she take off her shirt. She refused, and he ended up pinning her down by her throat as he tried to take it off of her.
And as this was happening, obviously this would be a very traumatizing situation, but what was running through Dottie's mind was whether her kids could hear what was happening, hoping that it wasn't frightening them. You know?
When he released his grip on her neck, he said, "Don't piss me off," in a frightening voice that she had never heard before. And out of fear of more violence, she removed her shirt. Then he went on to rape her. She tried looking away and thinking about other things, but he forced her to look at him.
I can't imagine having control of my own body stolen from me like this,
right?
And feeling so helpless. But the one small detail from the court records I really wanted to share, and this was mentioned, I think I had referred to this a couple weeks ago, about a detail I left in just because it makes the bad guy look even worse. He actually lost it right in the middle of, raping her. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
Like he deflated.
Got it.
And then he lamented, "I can't do anything right, not even leave sperm sample for the police."
What?
Yeah. So this guy, he's a real Eeyore mixed with like a terrible rapist.
Don't drag Eeyore into this.
No, I just mean the attitude. Like always bummed out. I don't want to say it's funny because this is a terrible situation for Dottie, but...
No, but it's just like, what is wrong with this guy?
Well, yeah, and I don't mind a rapist being emasculated while he's committing such a terrible act, you know?
Right. David went on to rape Dottie 4 times, with breaks in between where he talked to her, saying that before he killed himself, he should kill her ex-husband. Can you imagine how scary that would be?
No, I can't.
He also asked her to give him a few minutes to kill himself before she called the police.
It doesn't make any sense.
At about 4:15 a.m., he finished raping her for the last time.
So that's, 3 hours?
Oh, that had to be terrible. Just absolutely terrible. He asked her if she wanted to call the police, but she laid there in fear for her life and begged him to leave before her kids got up. She said that he looked like an animal the way he was acting.
Well, again, the thing she's really worried about is she doesn't want to scare her kids.
After he left, she threw away her underwear and made sure her front door was locked. Then she returned to the bed. When the kids got up, she told them that she was sick and stayed in bed, ignoring any phone calls that she got.
And Dottie was obviously extremely traumatized after this.
At 9 a.m., she got up and called her friend Jerry to tell her what happened. And Dottie and Jerry decided it was best to get the kids to safety first, then talk to her minister, and then call the police. After Dottie left the house, David somehow found her and tried to block her with his pickup as she drove through Vermilion. Oh my gosh, this guy. She swerved onto a lane and sped past him.
So he obviously hadn't killed himself yet.
Right. She was able to drop off her kids somewhere safe outside of town, and then she returned to Vermilion and visited her minister's home. David drove by while she was there, but didn't come in. Around noon, Dottie went to the police station with the minister and met the detective named Ray Hoffman, who quickly went back to Dottie's house to collect evidence and arrested David Lykken. Among the physical evidence found in the bedroom, Dottie had bruises on her arms and a moon-shaped fingernail cut on her throat from being choked. Forensics and DNA testing were able to prove that what David had done to Dottie. After a lengthy trial, he was finally sentenced in May of 1992 to 225 years in prison. Wow.
Yeah, so he's never getting out, which is very deserved. But it's sad how depressed he seemed to be and how that affected other people around him, you know? I have a hard time sympathizing with someone who uses their depression as an excuse to terrorize others. It's just despicable, but I do hope he gets the mental help, or that he got the mental help he needed while in prison. Not for his own benefit, but so he could fully realize the gravity and depravity of what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Because he seemed to have no shame here. And I hope he truly realizes that he was in the wrong, and his depression was no excuse for what he did. But that's the backstory of David Lykken. And you may be wondering at this point how the heck this connects to the story we were originally telling, because we just kind of did a 180 here.
Right.
Jumped into a completely different story. Well, David Lykken had attended the same church as Pam Jackson and Cheryl Miller. And not only that, he also rode the bus with Sherry in the late 1960s. So there's a connection.
Interesting.
There, which brings us to June of 2004. South Dakota decided to form a new department to look into cold cases. And one of the cases they chose to pursue was the case of Pam Jackson and Sherry Miller. And as we know, in 1992, he began serving his prison sentence of 225 years. So he's already a convicted rapist.
Right. Because of David Lykken's current status, serving time for a violent kidnapping and rape, and his past connection to the missing girls, he became a suspect in their disappearance. They even interviewed David Lykken's younger sister a few times. She drew their interest after she became visibly upset while talking about a burn pit on the farm where David would burn a lot of stuff. She also recalled seeing a light brown or tan car, quote, a little bit bigger than a Volkswagen station wagon, parked near one of the gas tanks on the farm. She picked a Studebaker Lark out of the lineup of photos of random cars.
Which is the car the girls were driving, so this lead's looking really promising with that kind of connection.
Right. An investigator asked the sister if she recalled seeing any bodies or limbs in or near the car, and she said she recalled seeing, quote, Cheryl lying over the steering wheel of that car and Pam with her head on the passenger window.
Mm-hmm. So this testimony was obviously way too much for law enforcement to ignore, and they obtained a search warrant for that farm in Alcester, South Dakota, where David Lykken had lived in 1971 at the time of the girl's disappearance. So they executed the search warrant on August 24th, 2004, using heavy equipment to dig up the property, but they never found the car.
They conducted another interview with the sister in late October of 2004 under hypnosis, where she recalled being in a machine shed and hearing a gunshot, which made her come outside to see what had happened. Then she recalled her brother choking her until she passed out.
We do know he likes to choke.
Yeah, seriously. After this, she said she recalled seeing 2 teenagers' bodies in a wheelbarrow on the farm, and said something about a tractor and grinder being used, then saying the girls were in the feed.
So this is a pretty vivid memory that she's recalling. Like, where would this come from if there was no connection?
Right. They did another interview with the sister in November of 2004, where she described seeing clothing on the farm similar to what the family of the missing persons described. They also spoke with the man who had been the Union County Sheriff at the time of the disappearance, who had been searching for the girls in the area. His name was Ed Ekren, and he recalled stopping at the Lykken family residence and them seeming very nervous to talk to him.
Sketchy.
Okay, so it's adding up.
Yeah, so all this together was enough to get a second search warrant for the farm in November of 2004. But again, nothing was found. And despite this, there was just too much testimony pointing to David Lykken to ignore. And in 2006, they were able to get another search warrant, and this time they found something. There was a Bible with strands of hair, which, as we know, they were both religious. And also newspaper clippings of the disappearance of Pam and Sherry. So now that's a direct connection. So they felt like they were really getting somewhere with this case. Obviously, these are pretty coincidental.
Yeah.
I also heard they found clothing, photographs, and even bones on the property.
Okay, so
But I couldn't find the details about those.
it sounds like case closed, right?
Yeah, it does.
In March that same year, an inmate named Black Crow said that David Lykken had confessed to killing the girls. He was given a wire to wear and claimed he had conversations in the prison library with David Lykken. Whatever was found in that recording helped lead to David being charged with the murder of Pam and Sherry in July of 2007. The trial was set for March of 2008, but just weeks before the trial, the charges were dropped when they discovered that it wasn't David Lykken's voice on the tape, but actually another inmate that Black Crow asked to act like David and confess.
So, obviously, there's a motive here because he was probably hoping if he helped the police convict someone, he'd get some kind of special treatment.
Mm-hmm.
But that really backfired when he was charged with perjury. But sadly, again, despite all this testimony from Lykken's sister and the suspicious clippings found at the farm, the case hit another dead end. After this, another 5 years passed with nothing new, but on September 23rd of 2013, over 42 years after the disappearance, there was another discovery. This one's a big one.
A fisherman was at Brule Creek, which is right between Vermilion and Alcester in South Dakota. The water level was extremely low at the time, and the fisherman spotted tires sticking up out of the water. Upon closer inspection, he saw a vehicle laying upside down in the bottom of the creek and quickly called the police. They pulled off one of the hubcaps and were able to identify that it belonged to a 1960 Studebaker Lark.
So what are the odds that the exact model car these girls went missing in would be in a creek between where they lived and where David Lykken lived?
This is so crazy. The license plate of the car was still readable, and they were able to confirm that this car had been owned by Sherry's grandfather.
So this was definitely the car they were driving. But what was inside the car was basically frozen in time.
Mm-hmm.
And the evidence they found painted a picture of exactly what happened that night.
They found a watch inside the car, still intact, showing that it stopped working at 10:20 p.m. They also found Sherry's purse with her driver's license, coins, a key, and notes from classmates inside.
Now remember, 10:20 p.m., this was 50 minutes after they met at the church parking lot at 9:30.
Okay.
So not even a whole hour after that.
The keys were still in the ignition, and the car was still in third gear. The switch for the headlights were still in the on position. These all indicate that the car was being driven normally at the time it went into the creek. One of the tires was severely damaged. But the bit that really told the story were the human remains that were also found in the car, fully clothed, sitting in the front seat where they would have been while driving to the quarry. And DNA proved that it was Pam and Sherry. There was no evidence of foul play on the remains.
So all this evidence pointed to the fact that this was just an accident.
There was no evidence in the car that the girls were drinking or intoxicated, but it was a dirt road with a newly installed bridge, and authorities theorized that dust got kicked up and impaired Sherry's vision, causing her to miss the new bridge and drive into the creek.
Ugh. So whatever happened here, it was pretty clear to the authorities that there was no foul play, which means David Lykken had nothing to do with it.
That is wild.
Which is, it's crazy after all this stuff his sister said, which is like, where the heck did that come from?
Right.
Like maybe
Seriously.
She was just trying to get attention and she hated her brother. I mean, he was a terrible person. He had been in prison for 12 or 13 years by this point. So maybe she was just making it all up. Who knows? But yeah, apparently it had nothing to do with what actually happened. But the whole David Lykken rabbit hole we went down earlier may have seemed like a diversion from the case we're actually talking about here. But first of all, I think it was important to get that background because Dottie had a horrible experience with him.
Right.
But then it's also that some people have seen him as one of the victims in this case because he was charged with... Right. He was charged for a crime that he didn't commit, which I completely believe that it's terrible. Like, it's way worse for a person to get charged with a crime that they didn't commit than it would be for a person to get off.
Right. But since he was already serving 225 years, what were more years tacked on? Like,
exactly.
Did it matter? No.
I think it's important to remember this guy had still committed this horrible crime, and I don't think him being charged in this case should overshadow the tragedy of the Jackson and Miller families not knowing what happened to their loved ones for 42 years.
Right.
Like, all the stuff her dad was searching for her. And I think it's sad that people focus more on this guy getting falsely accused than on what the families had to go through. But that's just me.
Well, yeah, and to add to that, Dottie wasn't even the only person that David Lykken had assaulted. His first victim was way back in 1977, and it was his own wife. They had only been married for 4 months, but he repeatedly assaulted and raped her, even making threats to kill her son.
Yeah, so this threatening to kill other people thing wasn't new, and the assault wasn't new. And I don't know how, as we go through this, I don't know how he was still a free man in 1990.
Right,
but
I don't either.
Keep going.
In the summer of 1982, he physically and sexually abused a cafe waitress that he was dating after she tried to break up with him, and threatened to kill her parents. So there you go. In January of 1983, he kidnapped a woman who he had dated for about 3 months after she broke up with him. He let her go after driving her out to a rural area and raping her, but a month later, he broke into her son's apartment where she was staying and raped her again. So this guy does not take breakups well. No,
he obviously has a clear MO here. But this time, finally, he was charged, but only with burglary. I don't know how the heck that works. If he would have been charged correctly, it would have spared Dottie, probably. Like, 3 different people he assaulted sexually, and then this third one he kidnapped.
Right, it's insane.
In each case, he threatened to kill other people related to them. But again, if he would have been charged properly, it would have spared Dottie and another victim he had between this woman and Dottie in 1986.
In January of 1986, he met his 4th victim at a singles Christian conference. He tried to hit on her, but she rejected him on the spot. He acted so erratically after her rejection that she had to report him, and he was ordered to move to Colorado. But in March of 1986, he returned to South Dakota, showed up to the woman's home, and ranted about how God had told him that she loved him. Then he strangled and raped her, threatening to kill her and her children if she reported him.
Oh my God.
So he's also a vicious stalker, because how did he even find her?
Right?
And he hadn't even been dating her. They had only met for one singles conference.
Yeah,
where people reject people all the time.
Must have followed her home. But it's like no wonder he was depressed in 1990. He had done so many terrible things.
Right.
You know, like, how could you live with yourself after doing all this and getting away with it? But he definitely has a pattern or a mode of operations here. He typically has some kind of pre-existing romantic involvement, real or imagined, like with this last woman. And there's no evidence of any of this with Pam or Sherry. So yeah, he didn't have anything to do with them. But again, just because he's innocent of their murder doesn't mean he's innocent by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. No, this guy was terrible. He was a terrible human being.
But to wrap up, I just want to mention the saddest part of this all to me is Pam's father, Oscar, he had searched so tirelessly for her. He had gone pretty much everywhere he could think of to find her, even looking through photos of deceased people that just with a glimmer of hope.
Mm-hmm.
But this is awful. He passed away on September 18th, 2013 at the age of 102.
Wow.
But it was just 5 days before the car was found.
Oh, that is awful.
So it's...
5 days? That poor guy.
He searched for 42 years. And 5 days before the family got closure, he died. So tragic.
It is.
That he searched all that time and never got the closure he was looking for.
Well, that's depressing.
I know. It's like there's so many coincidences in this story.
Yeah.
That, like this, or like the grandma passed away right after they disappeared.
Right.
That's
Well, she
really
probably
sad.
partially died of a broken heart, too,
Yeah.
when that happened. Poor thing.
Well, Sherry was her caretaker. Anyway, I thought this was an interesting story.
Very interesting. Weird, because it's kind of like 2 stories into one. Like a 2 for 1.
Yeah, it is. Well, most of the sources I found telling the story didn't have much of the background of David Lykken, but I actually found, I think it was an affidavit from Dottie that she had, when she had filed against David. But yeah, whew.
What a creep.
Man, I feel really bad for Oscar. It sucks.
Yeah, all the whole families, all the families, members and relatives.
But anyway, that's it for that story.
Mm-hmm.
You have anything else to say before we wrap it up?
Just to remember to practice logum. Have you said your 3 things that you're grateful yet today? All you listeners?
I haven't.
I haven't either. No.
Should we do it right now?
Okay.
You go first.
I'm grateful for the sunshiny day and for spending the morning on the river with you.
Oh, that's nice.
And my 3 fluffy kitties that drive me crazy.
Oh, yeah. Burrito was nuts during this episode.
Burrito was
you can let him in
naughty.
now if you want.
Yeah, I will in a minute.
I'm grateful that we went in the pool when we got home. That was nice.
The blow-up pool.
Yeah.
Don't get too excited.
It's like my favorite place to spend time now in the summer. I'm grateful that I get to eat now because it's because we're done recording. And
me too. I'm grateful for that as well.
one last thing. I'm grateful that we still get along. Yeah.
I'm grateful for that too.
Like everyone, we go through rough patches, but I'm glad we can work them out.
I am too.
Cool. Well, is there anything else you want to say?
So no, I don't think so.
Awesome. I think wrapping up with the little logum was perfect. So, thank you guys for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye.